I am 109 years old, and I want to tell you something I wish I had understood when I was 40, because I spent too many years believing happiness would arrive after I had finished everything that needed to be done. I thought it would come when the bills were paid, when the children were settled, when the house looked perfect, when I had saved enough money, or when life finally became quiet. But life has a funny way of moving the finish line every time you reach it. I have watched people spend their whole lives preparing to be happy, only to discover that they were standing inside the very life they had been waiting for. I have seen a successful businessman cry over a lonely dinner, and I have seen an old woman with almost nothing laugh so hard over a bowl of soup that she had to put her spoon down. That contrast stayed with me. I began wondering what the happiest people I had known understood that the rest of us kept missing. I did not find the answer in a book, a bank account, or a beautiful house. I found pieces of it in kitchens, hospital rooms, gardens, train stations, church pews, and quiet conversations after midnight. I learned that happiness is not one enormous secret. It is a collection of small truths that become clearer when you have lived long enough to see what disappears and what remains. The first truth surprised me because I had spent decades doing the opposite. I used to think happiness meant adding more, but I slowly learned that sometimes happiness begins when we stop frightening ourselves with the idea that we are behind. When I was 63, I knew a man named Adrian who owned 3 restaurants and drove a car that cost more than my first house. He was always rushing. Even during dinner, he looked at his watch. He had everything people told him to want, yet he rarely seemed at peace. One evening, he said something I never forgot. I have spent my whole life trying to become someone who can finally relax. I looked at him and thought, what if he never does? That question followed me for years, because the second truth was waiting right behind it, and it had even more to do with the people we love. When I was 71, I learned that a crowded room can still be lonely, and I learned it from a woman named Maribel, who seemed to know everyone in our little town outside Savannah. She hosted lunches, birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, and neighborhood meetings. Yet one afternoon, she sat beside me on my porch and quietly admitted that she had nobody she trusted enough to call when she was afraid. That broke my heart because I had mistaken popularity for closeness. I had done it myself. I had spent years answering letters, attending events, smiling for photographs, and saying I was fine when I was not. Then my husband Daniel died, and suddenly I discovered which relationships were real. I remember sitting alone at my kitchen table 3 days after his funeral when my old friend Celia arrived without calling. She brought bread, oranges, and a pot of beans. She did not give me advice. She did not tell me to be strong. She simply sat beside me. We ate in silence for nearly 20 minutes, and somehow that silence felt like love. That was when I began to understand the third truth. Happiness grows through closeness, not applause. I have met people from many places over the years, and I noticed the same thing again and again. A retired teacher from Lisbon told me that the best part of his week was coffee with 2 friends. A woman I met in Kyoto cared more about her weekly family meal than about the beautiful things she owned. A widower I knew in Montreal had very little money, but every Saturday, 3 neighbors came over to help him cook, and he called those evenings his richest hours. I began paying attention to something else, too. The happiest older people I knew usually had someone who needed them, not someone who admired them, but someone who depended on their kindness, their knowledge, their hands, or simply their presence. My granddaughter Elena once brought me a bag of flour and asked me to teach her my biscuit recipe. I was grieving at the time, and I had been wondering whether my useful years were behind me. But when she said, "Grandma, I need you," something inside me changed. I stood up, tied my apron, and began teaching. I did not realize then that this small kitchen lesson would reveal another truth that took me decades to understand. The fourth truth is one I wish more people understood before retirement, because being praised feels wonderful for a moment, but being useful can give an ordinary day a reason to begin. I discovered this after my husband died. I had spent years organizing family meals, helping neighbors, caring for children, and keeping a house running. And then suddenly there was no one asking me to do anything. I thought freedom would feel wonderful. Instead, for a while, it felt empty. Then a boy named Mateo moved into the house next door with his grandmother. His coat had a missing button, and one afternoon he asked whether I knew how to sew. I laughed because I was hardly expecting such a question to rescue me. I showed him how to hold the needle, and the next week he came back with another button. Soon his grandmother was asking me for recipes, his younger sister was asking me to read stories, and the church pantry asked whether I could help sort food. None of it was glamorous. Nobody applauded. But I began waking up with somewhere to be and someone to think about. That taught me that meaning often arrives wearing ordinary clothes. The fifth truth came later. Gratitude becomes more powerful when it is spoken. I had always been grateful, or at least I thought I was, but I often kept my gratitude inside my head. At 86, I found the address of my old school teacher, Mrs. Nora Bennett, who had once told me that being outspoken was not a flaw. I wrote her a letter explaining that one sentence had stayed with me for more than 70 years. Her daughter called me afterward and said her mother kept the letter beside her bed. I cried when I heard that. Imagine, all those decades, and I had almost taken my gratitude with me simply because I assumed she already knew. That day taught me that happiness is sometimes not about receiving something new. Sometimes it is about finally naming what was already precious. And then came the sixth truth, the one that took me the longest to accept. Forgiveness is not always about saying what happened was acceptable. Sometimes forgiveness is about deciding that what happened will not be allowed to occupy the rest of your life. My brother Samuel and I spent 8 years barely speaking after an argument over our mother's property. We both believed we were right. That was the problem. We were so busy defending our pain that neither of us noticed how much life was passing. When Samuel became seriously ill, I went to see him. We did not solve everything in one afternoon. We simply stopped fighting. I left his room with tears in my eyes because I suddenly understood how expensive resentment had been. I had paid for it with years I could never buy back. But there was still another truth waiting for me, and it would change the way I understood the difference between pleasure and a life that actually feels worth living. The seventh truth is that pleasure is loud, but meaning is quiet. And I learned that distinction only after watching many people receive exactly what they thought they wanted. I have enjoyed good meals, beautiful clothes, vacations, celebrations, and little luxuries, and I still enjoy them at 109. But none of them stayed with me as long as the moments when I knew my life mattered to someone. When I was 68, I began helping twice a week at a small community library. I expected to feel useful, but I did not expect the children. One little girl named Priya always chose books about animals, and she would sit beside me and explain every picture as though she were teaching me. A retired mechanic named Walter came in every Thursday because he liked having someone to talk to. I began realizing that happiness was not necessarily the feeling of having fun. Sometimes it was the quiet satisfaction of being part of something larger than yourself. The eighth truth came when I met a woman named Beatrice, who had spent decades trying to make her life look perfect. Her house was beautiful. Her clothes were elegant. Her photographs looked wonderful. But one evening she confessed to me that she could not remember the last time she laughed without wondering how she appeared. That sentence stayed with me because I realized how much time we can lose performing our lives instead of living them. I had done this too. I had worried about what people thought of my cooking, my clothes, my decisions, even my grief. At some point, I decided I was too old to spend my remaining years auditioning for approval. I wanted to be able to sit alone in my kitchen and feel comfortable with the woman looking back at me. The ninth truth came from my great grandson Leo, who once visited me and spent almost an entire afternoon looking at his phone while the family talked around him. I finally said, "Darling, whatever is happening inside that little machine had better be very important, because you are missing your grandmother's best stories." Everyone laughed, including Leo, but I meant every word. I had learned that attention is not a small thing. Attention is where life happens. A cup of tea is not just a cup of tea when you're actually there for it. A granddaughter's laugh is not background noise when you're listening. Rain on the roof can be beautiful when you are not rushing past it. And I thought I had learned my final lesson, but I had not, because the 10th truth was still waiting. And it was the one that made me look back at almost every decade of my life differently. The 10th truth is that someday can quietly steal an entire lifetime. And I know this because I have used that word more times than I care to admit. Someday I will travel there. Someday I will learn the piano. Someday I will call my old friend. Someday I will rest. Someday I will tell my daughter what she means to me. Someday I will forgive myself. I had a dear friend named Lillian who talked about learning to paint for nearly 30 years. She always said she would begin when life became less complicated. Life never became less complicated. Then her hands became too painful for the kind of painting she had imagined. And one afternoon, she said something that I still hear in my mind. I thought I had more ordinary days, not more spectacular days. Ordinary days. That sentence changed me. I realized that the ordinary Tuesday morning, the simple lunch, the phone call, the walk around the block, the laughter in the kitchen, the quiet chair by the window, these are not the waiting room before real life. These are real life. I think that is why happiness becomes easier to understand when you grow old. You stop expecting it to arrive with fireworks. You begin recognizing it when it quietly sits beside you. You understand that love is often a hand on your shoulder. Gratitude is often a sentence spoken before someone leaves. Meaning can be a pot of soup delivered to a lonely neighbor. Forgiveness can be one conversation that finally ends a war nobody remembers how to explain. Attention can be putting down the phone while your family is talking. Courage can be beginning something imperfectly instead of waiting for the perfect moment. And I want to tell you something else, because I know some of you watching me are afraid. You may be afraid that your healthiest years are behind you. You may worry that loneliness has already become permanent, that your family is too busy, that you have made too many mistakes, or that you waited too long to change. I understand those fears because I have carried many of them myself. But I have learned that a life does not become worthless because it contains loss. Happiness does not mean that nothing hurts. At 109, I have buried people I love deeply. I have experienced disappointment, loneliness, regret, and days when getting out of bed felt like a negotiation. But I have also learned that sorrow and happiness can live in the same heart. A painful past does not cancel a beautiful present. You are allowed to begin again while carrying your memories. Now, I want to bring you back to the question I asked at the beginning, because after 109 years, I believe the answer is much simpler than I once imagined. I used to think happiness was something I had to achieve, but now I believe it is something I learned to notice, protect, and share. I do not need a perfect life to feel grateful for the one I have. I do not need everyone to approve of me. I do not need a bigger house, a better title, or another decade before I give myself permission to live. I need people I love, people who love me, a reason to get up, the courage to let go of old bitterness, the humility to say thank you, and the attention to notice the beautiful things that are already happening. I need to stop saying someday when I mean today. So if you are listening to me from your kitchen, your bedroom, your garden, or a quiet chair by the window, please do not think your story is finished simply because you have reached a certain age. I have watched people begin new friendships at 80, discover new interests at 70, repair family relationships at 90, and find a new reason to wake up after believing there was nothing left to give. I have seen people change their lives through very small decisions: a phone call, a walk, a meal shared with someone, a letter, an apology, a garden, a book, a laugh, a decision to stop waiting. You do not have to rebuild your whole life tomorrow morning. You can simply make today a little more honest. Tell someone you love them. Thank someone specifically. Sit with someone without looking at your phone. Forgive what you are ready to forgive. Ask for forgiveness where it is needed. Help one person with one ordinary problem. Step outside and notice the sky. Eat your meal slowly. Listen when someone speaks. Begin one thing you have been postponing. These actions may look small, but after 109 years, I have learned that small things are often the only things that become a life. The world may continue telling you that happiness is somewhere ahead, behind a purchase, a promotion, a perfect body, a perfect house, or a perfect future. I no longer believe it. Happiness is often already sitting at your table, waiting for you to notice. So please, my dear friend, do not postpone the people you love. Do not postpone your gratitude. Do not postpone your laughter. Do not postpone your forgiveness. And most of all, do not postpone your life. If my long years have taught me anything, it is this: you are still here, which means there is still something you can love, something you can learn, someone you can help, and some ordinary moment that can surprise you with its beauty. Thank you for sitting with me today. If these words brought you comfort or reminded you of someone you love, subscribe to the channel and stay with me, because I would be honored to keep sharing the simple lessons I have gathered across a very long life, one ordinary day at a time.